And then thanks for coming. So this is the first Talks at the Live. It's very exciting, and the intention is that hopefully we'll do more of these, and that the idea is just to introduce more people to the practitioners and like amazing people that are working around in Cape Town, so we all can sort of learn more from each other. So that's the idea, and Simone, I'm so excited Simone's the first guest. Because I think, so I'm going to let her explain what she does, but welcome Simone, and I think you guys will all find Simone's work incredibly interesting, a little bit like magic, but really, really interesting. Yeah, and please, if you have questions, the idea is it's interactive, so please do pop your hand up. If you have anything that you don't understand, then ask Simone. Yeah, okay, Simone, over to you. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm here for the great class. Like I said, I'm still sweating, and I feel like my brain-to-body connection has been rewired. A lot of communication going on. So that's really my background. I come from a movement background, also a little bit of history in Pilates, but I study biokinetics, a BASI medical honors degree in exercise science and biokinetics, and then from there I kind of moved into the movement therapies and the hands-on bodywork techniques. So what I want to speak to you about today is we want to talk about what pain is from our perspective, from the perspective of the movement therapies and Pilates instructors, body workers, people who actually work with the physical body. I think most of us understand pain from a medical perspective, at least what the existing models are. But there's quite a revolution happening in our understanding of pain with all the new research in neuroscience, and I kind of find myself sitting in the middle as a movement person and body worker saying to the scientists, well, we told you so. We've known this all along, but now science is kind of saying, well, here's the proof, here's the evidence. So, and what it really requires to understand pain differently now is to challenge our existing beliefs. What are our models of understanding the body? What have we been brought up to believe how the body exists and how it functions? So a lot of those beliefs are being challenged. Mine certainly have been totally thrown upside down and inside out. And the two models of belief I want to discuss with you today is one is on pain and what it is and where it comes from, and the other is on how the body functions. And there's a magical new buzzword that everyone's using and everyone's on about, and it's called fascia. So we're going to talk about what fascia really is and why is it so interesting suddenly. We've always known it exists, but now science is going, whoa, and they're researching it and putting it under the microscope and bringing out all sorts of radical evidence that makes us really question the models of thinking and belief that we've been basing our knowledge on. So I had the honor of studying at UCT. I did like I said, a medical honors in biokinetics and exercise science, and I was quite fortunate to work under some really super professors who were a little bit out of the ordinary in the way that they're scientists who like to challenge beliefs, and they're brave enough to challenge. And I had one of my profs was Dr. Wayne Derman, and then my main prof and supervisor was Professor Tim Noakes. So I'm sure by now you all know that he's challenged a whole lot of beliefs, not only in exercise science, hydration, obviously the whole nutrition story. That's a big challenge really to conventional thinking. But what he taught me was really to obviously I learned a lot of information, but what he really taught me was to scrutinize evidence. So just because a scientific study says this is evidence-based doesn't necessarily mean it's real. It's evidence-based according to what model of belief. So that was really my take-home message, and what it left me, besides all the knowledge that I learned, that a lot of that information has changed by now, almost 15 years later, is that it's given me an open mind to say, okay, this is what we believe and this is what exists, but let's be open about it. Maybe there is another way of seeing the body. Maybe there's more to what we just know. So if we haven't seen it, or if we don't know that it exists, of course we can't believe it. So I'm inviting you today to challenge your beliefs, or maybe even put them aside and say, okay, well, let's look at another way of how the body moves and how it functions, and what really causes pain. So what is pain? What is your understanding of pain?
Extreme discomfort.
Okay, it's ouch, yeah? What else?
Doesn't summer disappear?
Okay, some of it stays around. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Okay, so we were all brought up thinking pain is a bad thing. We were, as toddlers, we would fall onto our knees and hurt our knees and make the connection that impact means injury, means pain where we're hurting. Okay, so that's the normal, usual conventional way of seeing pain. So if we all take our fingers and we pinch our left ear really hard, what do we feel? Okay, well, what we perceive as pain. Is there anyone who doesn't perceive pain?
I would say if you have pain, at least you know you're alive.
Yeah.
That's a warning system.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's really what pain is. And so where does this warning signal come from?
Right.
Well done. That's progressive. That you all know that. Because we always think, well, pain is here, or pain is in my knee, or pain is in my back. But neuroscience has recently confirmed that pain exists exclusively in the brain. So it doesn't exist anywhere except here. The brain has to make the signal or create the output. And until it doesn't exist here, it doesn't exist. Okay? So, and really what it is, like what you said, it's a signal. It's a signal for your brain to either inspire you to withdraw from injury or from danger, or it's trying to get you to stop doing something. If you've got your hand on a hot plate, it might feel warm and fuzzy initially, but eventually the signals will be loud enough to protect you, to pull away. And it can also be a signal for you to do something different, to change. So really, what pain really is, it's a form of communication. So we've associated pain as something bad, almost as a punishment. People who've got chronic pain will say, well, it's really horrible. I don't want to have it. I don't want to live with it. So we associate it with something negative. But if we go back to its original source, we need to understand it as a form of communication. The brain probably has three main functions. One is obviously to keep us alive. So it wants us to survive. It wants to protect us. So the moment your brain perceives any threat, whether it's too much heat, whether there's too much tension or pressure, or of course whether there's a sharp object or something damaging you, it will stimulate a reflex for you to withdraw. So I was walking along the beach a couple of months ago in my bikini, wrapped in a sarong, and I was walking along, and somewhere along the line I kind of did that, and then I felt a pain signal, but I kept walking, and when I got home I thought, yeah, that was really sore, I better check out what it was. And when I looked, I actually had a puncture wound in my foot. And I did have a pain signal at the time. So that was the brain's normal way of protecting me, saying, withdraw your foot from that sharp object. So it turns out I actually stepped on a metal rod, and I had a 0.5 centimeter hole in my foot that stimulated a protective pain in that moment when it happened. But then by the time I got home, the second version of pain as we know it started clicking in, and that's called inflammatory pain. So inflammatory pain is also protective, and we all know it, so that when you have injury, or when you've cut yourself, or when you had surgery, or maybe if you have disease like fibromyalgia, or maybe arthritis, the body's instinctive protective response, is inflammation. And inflammation is also a very smart way of protecting us because it gives us sensitivity and it gives us pain around the area of injury. So what does that mean? So for the next 3 to 4 days, the pain and the sensitivity around my foot inspired me not to step on it. Because if I were to step on that injured puncture, I would exacerbate the injury. I would probably tear the wound open further. So it's a protective mechanism which makes us feel achy and sore and allows healing to take place. Okay. So now that kind of naturally, without major intervention, besides cleaning out infection and putting a plaster on it, that pain and the injury reknitted and healed on its own. Okay, so those are the two ways that we understand pain. Protection, so there's a pain as protection and a warning signal, and then there's an inflammatory kind of pain. And those are all medically understood, and if you have those kind of symptoms or maybe more severe inflammation, you would go to your doctor and you'd probably be offered painkillers or anti-inflammatories just to manage that pain if necessary. But really, the pain is there for a reason. So then a lot of us are saying, well, but I get pain and I don't know where it comes from. So I get a lot of clients coming to me with back pain, knee pain, many of whom have been for x-rays and scans, and some do have damage or injury and some don't. But they all have pain. So there's a third type of pain that's kind of new to the world and to our understanding, and that is what we call dysfunctional pain. So it's kind of like it's really not a protective mechanism. It's a maladaptation of our system, of our nervous system. Okay, so and that's the kind of pain that we can deal with as Pilates instructors, movement therapists, body workers, and it's also why some people call us miracle workers or magicians, because we can change pain in one session, in one instance. And it's quite curious, because how can I have pain for, I had a client who had a back pain for almost 7 years, and within one session his pain went away and he didn't have to come back. He didn't want to come back. Well, actually he did want to come back, because he said, well, if my pain's going to stay away, I'm just so happy. But I had to say to him, you don't have to come back. So this is the type of pain we need to explore and understand. Well, how can it be that there is pain without injury, without damage, without disease? So what is this pain? I've even had people come to me where they have pain, but they've been for scans and x-rays and MRIs and different specialists, not really able to give a clear diagnosis, and eventually a frustrated doctor even saying to them, the pain is all in your head, you're making it up, pull yourself together and get over yourself. So, the person walked in kind of with tears in their eyes saying, but I have pain, I'm experiencing pain. So when you pinched your ear, you were experiencing pain, and pain is an experience. And the reason why it's an experience is because it only exists in our conscious state. So when I walked on the beach, actually I went back to the beach just a few days ago, and I was walking along kind of in the same area where my injury happened, and I was walking along and I stepped on something sharp, and this time I actually collapsed onto the floor, and I rolled like an Italian soccer player, shouting out loud, grabbing my foot. And my friends were like, whoa, what's going on? Did something happen? And we all looked at my foot, and there was nothing to be seen. And I looked around, what could have inflicted this pain? And all I saw was a sharp little shell. And I was a little bit embarrassed to say, well, it was really painful. So, and how do we explain that? How come when I had that puncture wound, I kind of just went, oh, that's sore, and I kept on walking, and only later explored what that pain signal was all about. So if we look at the neurology of pain, we can explain it very clearly. So on impact, on a sharp object, the little nerve endings that sit in the skin, and then all the layers of muscle and fascia, they're sensory instruments, and they're waiting for information. So the moment they get stimulated, just like when you pinch your ear, those little organs or sensory nerve endings, let's call them that, get stimulated. So their job is to race up to your spinal cord and then send a signal up to the brain to say to the brain, you know, all out of breath because they've got there really quickly, saying, something is pressed onto the foot and it feels quite sharp. This is the information I'm giving you. So the brain goes, okay. So there's a part of the brain called the thalamus that then consults with the rest of the brain, calls a board meeting and says, what's going on here? Anybody know what the signal is all about? So it consults with your environmental receptors, or it even consults with your memory and your emotional parts of the brain. So on the second round of me walking on the beach, my memory and my environmental perception said, yes, we've been here before. And my emotional part of the brain said, the last time I felt this stimulus, I actually got injured and I was sore for a couple of days. So now the brain is consulting with all these board members, getting new information, which makes this pain experience a totally new experience. Even though it was a very similar stimulus, it was an impact that triggered something. So basically, pain is your own personal experience. So just because this doesn't hurt me doesn't mean it won't hurt you, because you respond emotionally to it in a different way. You may have, as a child, been tugged on your ear for being naughty, and that was really painful, and you associate that with a horrible punishment or not a pleasant experience. So that might trigger a heightened emotional response, which makes you experience pain totally differently. And the curious thing now in science is that there's quite a recent research study where they scanned a whole lot of spines under the MRI, and they found a whole lot of spines that presented with damaged discs and damaged vertebrae and bulging discs. And the curious thing about this research study was that 56% of the people who presented with mechanical injury were asymptomatic, which is like, you know, how's that possible? Because we associate injury and damage with pain. So that's where the pain and the neuroscience actually agree that pain is way more complex than what we think. It's not just there's damage, find it, scan it, fix it, because there can be many other factors to it. You may have had a previous back injury that made you expect the same kind of pain, or you may have never had a back injury before. You may have never stepped on something sharp before, so you didn't even expect to feel pain or, you know, have any kind of link to that. So basically the take-home message is that pain is very complex, but it is a personal, conscious experience based on many things, based on many factors that your brain processes before it even decides to send out a signal. So it makes us understand pain in quite a different light. I mean, we've got 86 billion neurons in our brain. So every time you receive a stimulus, whether it's a squeeze or a pinch or a cut or a bash, that information arrives at your brain and you interpret that pain signal in your own individual way. So we've got to respect that some people who've maybe been diagnosed with fibromyalgia might have a very heightened sensory response and even emotional response to pain. Whether or not it applies to the diagnosis, we don't know. People who are active and athletic actually get quite used to that stimulus of pain. You know, marathon runners get a pain signal every single step of the way. You know, so they respond emotionally to pain quite differently. So that's kind of where we're at in understanding pain, and where we as practitioners come in, where we can actually, or we're apparently helping, is that we are looking at pain, like I said, the third type of pain, where pain actually presents as a maladaptation, not as a problem that we need to go in surgically and fix. Okay, so and that's the technique that I'm busy developing or have developed, and we call it Brain-Body-Balance. So we look at how the brain receives, whether it receives the right information and what its output is. And we do that functionally. We test the functional neurology of the body. So what happened to me after my foot puncture on the beach, I hobbled along for about 3 days. So because I had inflammatory pain and I had pain signals, my brain rewired and it said, okay, there's pain there, stop using that foot. I mean, obviously I still had to walk, but I used it less. So the brain changed according to that information. So our brain actually changes according to the input it gets. You know, it is a central governor. It is a control center, and that's, that's the new model in exercise as well. Is that the brain is our ground control. It's where all information has to process for action to take place. So what we do is we say, okay, what is the sensory input? Is there sensory input? And what is the motor output? And that's what we test in our kind of functional neurology technique. So pain can be coming from two possibilities. Okay, so the main cause of pain when there's no proof of damage is that there must be a miscommunication in how the brain perceives the body or the information that the brain is getting from the body. So it's two-way communication. Brain sends signal for us to move. Body sends signal back to the brain to say it's safe, there's no threats, because remember our brain wants us to survive. The second priority for the brain is prediction. Can I predict safe movement, or will I fatigue by the end of the marathon and pass out and not survive? And the third is movement. The third main purpose of the brain is to get us to move. Okay, so the brain plans movement. The cerebellum is at the back of the brain is kind of our main motor control center. So it helps us plan movement and execute movement. So we test whether, in our Brain.Body.Balance technique, we test whether your brain can actually achieve confident movement. And if it can't achieve a movement, there must be a blockage. Okay, and if there's a blockage, that means the brain perceives that as a threat. It even perceives that movement that you do 100 times a day as a threat. So for me, stepping on that foot was a threat because I would have damaged it further. So from hobbling along, I compensated. So the brain said, okay, let's not use that foot so much, let's use this side. So what did I do? I rotated my leg out and I hiked my hip up on this side. And by doing that for about 3 days, my brain rewired its system, and I had what we call a compensation. So instead of walking evenly through both feet, I started favoring the left. My foot healed, everything in the body healed within 3 to 6 months. So if you have pain lasting longer than that, it can't be a mechanical problem. It has to be a functional problem. So I developed a dysfunction. I developed a compensation, even though that pain had gone away and I could actually step on it again without any pain. But because I practiced stepping on the left more than the right, I rewired my brain's system and of how it sees my body. So about 3 weeks later, I woke up one morning and I had pain in my back going into my hip, what we would, probably diagnose or have diagnosed as sciatica. And I thought, okay, well, that's strange, I didn't do anything. Like, there was nothing I did that caused the pain, that should have caused the pain. There's no injury. If I had gone for an x-ray, I would have probably seen a little bit of wear and tear, or maybe the start of arthritis in my hip, and maybe I would have been given pain medication, or hopefully not have gone for surgery for a hip replacement. But that's kind of where we end up these days, because we, according to the mechanical model of thinking, we look for cause of injury, a cause of pain, which must be injury. It must be damage. It must be something that's hurting the body. But in this case, it wasn't. It was a dysfunction. It was a maladaptation of my nervous system. So there was no proof. If you put my body under MRI, there should have been no proof or evidence for pain, because I apparently don't have any damaged joints, luckily so far. So, and even if they shouldn't give me pain constantly. It's the compensation of muscles that cause pain. Okay, and so we, in our neuromuscular technique, we've worked out a way of resetting that pain instantly. If it is a functional pain, you can reset it instantly. And if it's something that you've done for years and years, that you've compensated on one side, through one side, it may take longer. Okay, so like I said, there are two ways of dealing with pain. One is to find in your body probably tension. In my case, it was hip tension and lower back tension. That was, my muscles stayed tight. So the sensory receptors in my muscles were actually blocked. So they no longer could give my brain ideal information, which means my brain said, okay, let's protect this area and let's not take that road, let's use another road. Okay. So that's, if we look at how the brain really works, our brain has a map of our entire body. So if you imagine you open your Google map on your phone, your brain has a map of your entire body. So if we think of movement, to go from seated to standing, there's an ideal neural pathway. That's the quickest way of getting up. And that's usually using what I call the main road, the biggest muscles. So if you want to get from here to Greenpoint, the quickest way is probably the main road. But if there's a traffic jam in the main road, your Google map would probably have to go up through the hills, through the Fresno Hills, and then down and eventually get to Greenpoint. But it's a much longer way. It's much more exhausting, but you'll still get there. So it's the same in the body. If I have a tight muscle in my hip, my brain, that part of the map gets blurry, and there's a lot of, we call it a traffic jam. So instead of using that muscle to get up, the brain just goes, okay, well, there's so many other roads that we can take. Let's just go up and down. And so we still achieve movement, but it's in an unusual way, and it fatigues us, and eventually we probably will get pain because the brain's saying, hey, you're overusing pathways that aren't really meant to be used. You're going up and down through the hills, and these roads aren't designed for this kind of heavy traffic if you use it every day. Does everybody understand that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the type of pain that we come across and we deal with, and it's called dysfunctional pain or maladaptive pain. Any questions around that before we go on to how the brain even perceives or where it gets its information from?
Well, I'm curious how you do that. You said you've got to ways within one session to sort it out.
Yeah, look, not always, but it can happen. So it is a good question. So let's start with a model of thinking. So what Professor Tim Noakes, when I was studying at UCT, he proposed that in the exercise model of fatigue, he proposed that the brain is the central governor. So if we think of running a marathon, the old model of thinking was that as we get tired, the heart slows down because the heart gets tired, and the muscles burn because they're fatigued or they're broken, because the body is a machine, it's a mechanical model. So he proposed a new theory, which is now probably more common, is that the brain is the central governor. So the brain is the one that sends a signal to your muscles to make you feel pain, and the brain is the one that controls the heart and makes your heart rate slow down. So basically the brain regulates the body, it regulates the output. And then some clever scientists, in order to prove this, approached marathon runners at the end of the marathon and said, okay, so according to the mechanical model, your muscles must be broken because you're tired. So they put an EMG, an electromyograph that measures muscle activity, on their thighs, and boom, the muscle could contract at 100%. So again, that's kind of confirming that the body is not a machine, it's a neural system that's wired, and it's wired for protection. So even though at the end of the marathon you can barely take another step, if you stimulate the muscle, it still works perfectly. So it can't be a mechanical issue. And I'm not saying it's impossible, because there is pain that comes from a mechanical model 2. So what we do is we test exactly that function of the brain. We test whether the brain can confidently send out motor output. So, movement is volitional. We choose to move. So if you choose to lift your arm, it should have an output signal. So you should measure a minimum amount of strength. So we test that functionally. We put the body into its position. If you want to test your hip flexor, we put that movement into its vector of force, and we test it. So if the nerve output is confident, the muscle tests strong. And if it isn't, you often see people wobbling, or you see them compensating with other muscles. Okay, because we're not just made up of pulleys and levers. We're actually an integrated system of fascia. So movement should happen smoothly and confidently. So if the motor output isn't strong, then we know there must be an output issue. So the question is, why is the brain protecting that movement? So it has to be protection. That's the one option. And the second reason for why we get pain or how we can test that there's not movement is sensory information. So sensory feedback. So if it's not an output problem, it must be an input problem. So the easiest way to understand that is if your muscle is already contracted and in a state of spasm, you're actually inhibiting the sensory receptors. So your brain is now no longer getting information about the flow of traffic on the main road because it's jammed. So those sensory signals actually shut down. Just like when you have a scar, your brain doesn't see that road. It doesn't see that area. It's all blurry. It might see a little bit, it's like, that looks like the main road, but because it's not confident in its movement and in its clarity, it takes another path. So if you've got sensory blockage, we use a myofascial technique, which is actually sensory. We stimulate the nerve endings to wake them up, to give the brain a signal. The brain's map of the body becomes clear and it moves confidently. It switches off pain. It's really, your body has its own healing abilities. You don't need a pill to switch off pain. You can take it, but it's only temporary. What we're trying to inspire is for you to look at your own body and say, well, what is triggering this dysfunction? Is it the way I sit at my computer all day, that these muscles get so tight that they're blocked, that every time I get up and try and move, the brain doesn't even see those muscles anymore because they're so tight. So it starts propelling itself with other muscles, and then those get tired and they trigger pain. So the whole model is to say your body has its own intelligence and it's very good at healing itself. You just need the right, you need to give your brain the right information, either through movement, which is what Pilates does. Pilates helps your brain get map clarity. So we call it brain map clarity. It opens up the traffic, it clears the roads, it makes your Google map really clear. And Pilates and movement therapies, so any movement that you do really slowly, so today in the class we did pelvic tilts and we did them slowly and with intention. If you move slowly, you have to recruit more nerve fibers to achieve movement. If you go really quickly, you just use your big muscles and they've got main roads and big nerves that can move that can generate force on their own. So the slower you move and with more intention, the more nerve fibers you need to activate. So we're even finding now that, let's say you have a shoulder injury or shoulder pain, and every time you lift your arm, you experience pain. And that's just a trained response now. We found that if you move really slowly through that pattern, you don't trigger pain because you're stimulating more pathways, and you actually can retrain your brain not to feel pain. Okay, and that's why Pilates and exercise therapies and all these kind of movements with intention change pain, and they can, not always in one session, they can change chronic pain. Because think of the mechanical model. The mechanical model says if I have pain, it must be damaged. But you can ask any doctor or specialist, any injury will heal within 3 to 6 months. So if you've got pain for longer than 3 months or 6 months, it can't be mechanical. It can't be a damaged joint. It must be dysfunctional. It must be a maladaptation of how your body moves or how your brain perceives your body. It's a false alarm. The pain is actually a false alarm because you're using unconventional roads to just get from here to Greenpoint or to just lift your arm.
Things like arthritis and when you get those things, because surely that's in the joint, you can't.
It's another
Tell
curious
yourself.
thing. It's a good question, and I've come across quite a few examples. So arthritis does trigger inflammation. So there is inflammation around the joint. So, but it's actually not what we're finding now with our increased understanding of fascia, which we haven't really spoken about yet, is that first of all, inflammation triggers sensory sensitivity. It's not a sharp pain, but it's an ache because the tissue is damaged. So there is mechanical damage in that case. But what we're finding is that most of the pain in arthritis doesn't actually come from the damaged joint. It comes from the fascia, the connective tissue around it, that actually has most of the sensory receptors waiting to give the brain information. So, naturally the fascia the muscles try to protect any damaged area, so they tighten around the arthritic joint. And it's the tension in the muscle or around the joint that actually triggers more pain than the joint itself. So again, what we've found in our practice is that moving an arthritic joint really slowly through ranges of motion, we do that a lot with elderly people, who've anyway got loads of arthritis. We do a lot of very slow neural patterning, moving the joints through slow ranges of motion, and then also giving sensory input to the muscles that are spasming and putting pressure on the joint. So if you wriggle the fascia around the joint gently, you give the brain a signal to remeasure and reset tension, which takes pressure off the joint and can reduce the pain of arthritis. Arthritis, the pain also fluctuates, so it's very hard to say, well, I've got pain today, but yesterday I didn't have pain. So, is it really the mechanical stimulus or is it functional?
Can you just do a general explanation of what is fascia?
Okay, yeah, I haven't gotten to that. You can stop me if I'm running out of time.
Guys, how do you work with migraine sufferers?
Oh, migraines are very complex. It's a multifaceted thing. So we have had success. We've had, migraines one of the triggers, let's put it that way, can be posterior neck tension or pressure coming up from the spine, or actually the whole posterior chain can come from the TMJ. Tension headaches are dysfunctional adaptations of the nervous system that triggers pain. So we could test for that. We can only do what the tools that we have and see if it changes the pain pattern. But you'll be surprised how often headaches, or unless it is really diagnosed as a migraine, but how often headaches actually come from pain, tension referred from neck muscles. Your sternocleidomastoid can trigger major pain in the neck and the jaw and the teeth, can give you throat pain. Your whole posterior chain of neck and shoulder muscles, they all strap and attach onto the cranium, so that tension here can put a lot of pressure on your head, so it can refer pain into the head. So it's one option to explore if you're a migraine sufferer.
Botox into my cheeks and everything for that specifically.
Yeah. And did the Botox help?
It does help for a while, but I'm also on a channel blocker because things are not connecting.
So it's
Sorry, just touching on that, in terms of your technique of the sensory feedback and reconnecting the neural, because surely the Botox it
Just
relaxes
relaxes
the muscle. So
well, it paralyzes the nerve. So
so would it be more long term if they're using the B3 technique to
It's less invasive. You're not putting a neurotoxin into your body.
It might be cheaper
So-
too.
To her muscle herself.
She can do it herself, yeah.
That nerve is
Look, this is
more long term.
This is where the brain comes back in, because the brain learns pain. So if you've had chronic tension, and let's say you clench your teeth at night, or you're very stressed or naturally anxious, and you spend a lot of time tightening up these muscles, the communication between your brain and the function of that muscle is blurry, it's disturbed. So your brain can't motor that so well. It uses other muscles, you compensate with other muscles. So the whole communication system is mixed up, or let's call it in dysfunction.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying don't do Botox. It's a clever way. Like any painkiller,
I've tried.
any painkiller interrupts the pain pattern. So if your brain has learned pain, that's its new set point. It doesn't forget pain. It's now a program. It's like you've installed an app into your brain that fires up pain. So chemicals can help reset that pain pattern. Hasn't in your case?
I was on a different, she called it, it's almost like a channel block. I was on a different one for 2 years, did nothing. Botox relieves the symptoms, but only if, Botox runs out of your system. And if you're active, it's much faster, so it lasts about 3 months.
But it helped in that time, right?
Kind of.
So
for the tension headaches.
Yeah,
yes,
so
but
back
not for the
to
migraines.
Inga's point. So if you release tension, you are changing, well, in theory, you're changing sensory feedback to the brain. But if you've numbed it, maybe I don't know how much, you'd have to ask a doctor how much sensory feedback comes from a numb muscle. Probably none, because the receptors are paralyzed. So, but that's only one piece of the pie. So you know that let's call it the tension blocks information to the brain, but we still have to, and this is what we do in Brain.Body.Balance, we still need to work out what is your brain not motoring. Okay, it's not getting sensory input from here. What is it not motoring? There's a reason why you clench your teeth. You might be compensating for another muscle. Maybe your core muscles aren't working. If you think about clenching your teeth creates pressure in your body. So if your abdominal muscles aren't firing properly, if you clench your teeth or your neck, you're going to create stability. So, like if you try and open a tight jar, often if you clench your teeth, you get stronger because it's a compensator.
Apparently, I do this unconsciously when I'm sleeping, so I don't even know.
So
My husband told me.
So you need to do a lot of reprogramming. And all the other Brain.Body.Balance practitioners. There's a lot you can do. It's not always a clear solution. Okay, so what is fascia? Let's come back to the mechanical model of the body. So most of us, and in fact all of us, were trained that the body is a system of bones and joints and pulleys and levers, and we kind of move by contracting muscles that attach to bone via tendon and lever our arms up and down, and it's all wonderful. And we even looked at muscles in isolation. And then somewhere along the line, this whole thing started changing, and it changed when, so medical students, if any of you were a student or are, when you're a medical student, you get given a cadaver. Okay, so your mission in your kind of career of being a student is to dissect the whole body, and then analyze every muscle, every bone, every joint, every tendon, every ligament, all the organs. And as you do that, you kind of peel off the skin, you strip all the stuff in between, and chuck it in a bucket, and you go, wow, and you marvel at this machine that we have, and that we live in and function in. And then one day, one of the students raised his hand and said, what's that stuff in the bucket? So the scientist said, well, let's have a look at it. So they took this gooey, sticky stuff out, put it under the microscope, and they were like, whoa, what is this? They found that the fascia had so many fascinating compounds. First of all, it has a higher density of nerve endings than any other tissue in your body. So it's got more nerve endings than your muscles or your tendons or your ligaments. So why are we looking at whether the muscle is contracting? Because think about it, the nerve endings communicate to the brain. So when I move my arm, my brain has to get information from these muscles in order to achieve movement, and it needs to be able to communicate to this whole area to achieve movement. So it's changed our whole understanding of the neurology of sensation and of movement. So let's do this exercise. Grab the hand of the person next to you. Okay, so one person holds their hand up, and the person holding their hand up will close their eyes. Okay, and the other person is going to, anywhere on the surface of that hand, poke their finger. Okay, so just on one spot. So if your hand is up, your eyes are closed. So just poke your finger on one spot. Take your finger away. Now ask the person to open their eyes and put their finger exactly where they were touched. How accurate? Pretty accurate? Okay. Anybody way off target? Yeah? Who was off target? Have you had any injury? Well, you had multiple inputs. You had from two hands, right? Okay. So there we go. So most of you were almost to the millimeter on target. Someone who's had injury to the wrist, hand?
When I was a ballet dancer, I cracked a few.
Okay. So what happens to your neurology when there's injury? The brain goes, threat, danger, switch off electricity, protect, don't use this hand. And if that doesn't get reset, your map of your hand is very blurry. So when you get stimulated, so your headaches, your migraines might be coming from your wrist, but that's a whole nother conversation that we'll have one day. Okay, so what does this tell us? That the little nerve endings in your fascia, in the top layer of your fascia, has receptors waiting to give your brain information. And your brain's map of that area is so accurate that you can pinpoint where it is. So this is all the stuff, the fascia wraps around every muscle, every nerve, every bone, every tendon. Everything has a wrapping of fascia. And this is the crazy part, because we ignored this stuff. And now we suddenly, I just read an article recently, I think they're Japanese researchers. They're now saying that the contractile forces we get when we jump or when we move, that the fascia has more contractile force than the muscle. They're even saying that your muscles just contract isometrically, and your fascia, this gooey, sticky stuff, it's like a matrix, a web, it absorbs, it has the contractile force, and that's what compresses and then expands. So really what we are, we're like a big ball of fascia, and our bones are suspended in this fascia. So we kind of get held together. So in every movement, there's no isolation of just a pulley and a lever. It's a whole system that gets stretched and compressed and releases contractile forces. So it's changed our whole model of looking at the body from a neurological perspective and a mechanical, because we really are, our muscles and our whole system is supported by this stuff. To the point now that scientists have said, okay, no, this stuff is amazing. We're going to call it, we've got to label it something. So they're now saying the fascia is being considered an organ. So we all have an organ that we didn't know about. So they've labeled this organ the interstitium. So it's actually being called an organ because besides the fact that it's full of nerve endings and communication to the brain, it also, like I said, has contractile forces. It's like a web of, it almost looks like cling wrap. You can compress it, you can stretch it. It also is a hydraulic pump. It acts as a hydraulic pump that sends water and fluid through the body, and it carries voltage. That's the most exciting part. Yeah.
So is it basically another system?
It is a system that it's an organ. Well, it's being considered an organ. And it's more interesting for us than, like I said, just our machine, which is a bone joint.
How does it relate to pain?
Well, think about it. If all your nerve endings are in your fascia, where's the pain coming from? Your brain is getting information from nerve endings that are being squashed or threatened or pressed or stretched or overworked or inhibited. So that's where the information is coming from. And that's why all these myofascial techniques and movement techniques that involve dynamic, mobilizing movements are coming to the forefront again.
What are your views on lino?
Lino, look, okay, so again, lino is a form of myofascial release. So when we were still in our very mechanical model of seeing the body, the clever body workers already started working with fascia. Okay, so they initially, one of the first techniques that came out was rolfing. So the rolfers, I don't know if you've heard of it, they kind of said, it's not about the muscle, it's about the fascia. So what they did is they thought the fascia was mechanical. So and it's not a pleasant, if you've ever experienced it. Yeah. So the mechanical model says the fascia needs to be pulled and stretched. Like imagine taking a piece of cling wrap, squashing it. It needs to be stretched to open, to release.
It's extremely painful.
So, but massage is the same thing. Massage says, oh, your muscle is tight. And believe me, I was a sports massage therapist back in the day, and we used to pummel the muscle until it was bruised and to break it down so it can re-knit. But now we know it's not a machine. The reason why your muscle is tight, or your fascia is tight, it's because the nerve endings are blocked. So all you really need to do is touch or stretch the fascia to reset it. Very gentle. So those of you who've experienced the Brain.Body.Balance technique, it's sensory input. It's a very gentle stretch, touch. All you need to do to release a muscle, to release tension in the fascia, is to stimulate the nerve ending. That nerve ending will send a signal to the brain. The brain gets information about the state of tension of the muscle or the fascia. The brain instructs that muscle to reset to its original length. And the same for the fascia. So to manipulate the body so dramatically and so harmfully, you may achieve good results, but
You get bruises.
So how often do you find that the tension that they experience or the pain that they experience, obviously if you've had an injury and there's now the memory of that could be one cause, but how often do you have patients where it's anxiety related or it's from something that is like, oh, it's in your head technically because it's from an emotional state that you then, for instance at the moment, like I've got incredible, like I can't touch my leg here, it's super sensitive, but I know from experience of having to go find what's the issue, that it's emotionally based. It's either my anxiety's high or that. So what do you do when you have patients like that? I mean, because obviously you can treat the fascia, but I mean, the cause is not.
It's the biggest challenge, and then we get that a lot, especially in sports and dealing with athletes with sports injury, because even when all the mechanics and all the tissue healing has happened, when they step on that previously injured limb, they still experience pain because you're expecting pain. So we're back at the point of the wiring. And if the trigger is emotional, if your shoulders are tight because you get anxious, then you need to deal with the rewiring of that emotion. So the brain is still the trigger of that emotion. So you need to deal with that, which is not our scope of practice. So that's where look, you can program your emotions. You can stimulate an emotion with intention. So, but that, I would refer to emotional coach or psychologist or somebody who maybe deals with more practical ways of dealing with emotional feedback. But also, if you show the body in a safe environment that there's no pain, it can also balance emotions from the other way around. So and we all know that after exercise we do feel good. We feel, even emotionally feel good about ourselves. So I guess in a roundabout way you can change emotional responses with different input triggers, if you imagine it that way. But no, it's not my scope of practice. But I've had people after sessions burst into tears, releasing past trauma related to an injury. I've had people kind of feel the same feelings they had when they had injury. And I've also had one guy who had years of back pain. He's a writer, so he's at his desk all day long compressing his back. When his back finally eased and he released, he said he walked home and he started giggling. He said he giggled uncontrollably. He had this euphoric response. So the mind-body connection is also two-way communication. So it goes hand in hand. So very often the movement therapy and the passive input, the physical input can change the emotional brain state. But I wouldn't claim that. I would just say it's possible.
But it's good to look from both ways.
Yeah. It's one access point into a multifaceted, and pain is multifaceted. Even your organs. In the 1890s, a researcher called Head, and that's why they're called Head patterns, he proved that your organs can refer pain into your body, which is now commonly known. Like people who have a heart attack or heart problems get pain in their left arm, I think their jaw, and people who've got pancreas issues get pain in their lower back, or I think also the shoulder. So because your organs have got very low afferent output, you don't feel your organs as much as you do your muscles. So if the organ has a problem, it projects pain into your body. So that's why I say pain is multifaceted. It can come from your organs, from your emotions, or just from your movement patterns in your fascia, and dysfunction in your fascia, which is what we work with.
Well, thank you, Simone. That was very interesting. I always find it fascinating. I hope you guys all found it fascinating. So thank you everyone for coming out on a Saturday morning, and thanks Simone for being here.
Thank you.